Hey guys, it's Connor, and today we're going to do a full behind-the-scenes breakdown of a music video I shot for Carcosa called Vanta Black. If you haven't seen the video yet, I'm going to leave a link below so you can see the context of what we're going to be talking about today, as well as links for you to go grab this EP if you like what you hear. The concept on this one was very simple, and that's because it had to be. We had to work on an extremely tight budget for this. The band had plenty of video content for all their other singles and everything else, but they needed one more piece of video content to go with the single that was going to release the day the EP dropped. When working on such a tight budget, you really have to lean into things that are cheap or free, preferably. So we just went with something dead simple. They sent me some references for videos that were shot basically on black backdrops with maybe a little bit of haze and like one or two lights for their lighting setups. So we kind of use that as our inspiration. And then because of the title of the song, which is Vanta Black, we decided to add some black ink in as B-roll and some themes throughout as well. And to save even more money, we had to use a free location, so this was all shot in one of the guitarist's parents' garage because we knew we could shoot there for free, we knew we could use it pretty much anytime we wanted, and we could clear out the space and do whatever the heck we wanted to do with it. For this first setup, we sort of had this idea of, well, we need to make this video a little more interesting than just performance shots in a single location, but a narrative is really expensive. It requires actors, multiple locations, that kind of thing. So we decided to opt for sort of a soft narrative. So the vocalist is also sort of playing a character that's slowly going insane. And all of that storyline is done in this setup here. It's just a black backdrop where we took some black landscaping fabric and put it up on the walls. And he's sitting in a chair, sort of slowly going insane. Landscaping fabric is really cheap if you want to find a quick way to black out walls without spending a lot. It's like 40 bucks for a roll of about 100 feet, and that blacked out 2 of those walls for us, no problem. It covered everything that we needed. Lighting here is super simple. I've got a falconized light mat off to the left-hand side with a softbox on it, and on the right-hand side, I've got an Aperture 120D. I knew I wanted to get a lot of different angles just for the sake of variety because we can't get a lot of different setups or locations. So what I did is these 2 lights are sort of between a side light and like a 3/4 backlight, lighting him really bright so that all the shadow is actually in the middle of the face instead of on one side. This allows me to move around him and get multiple angles without having to relight things and figure out how to shoot into the dark side of the face every single time. If I just put it dead center, I can shoot at a bunch of different angles. Just so things don't look perfectly symmetrical, I've got 2 different qualities of light. So on the left-hand side, it's really soft because we've got a large source and we've got a softbox on it. And then on the right-hand side, it's just a really harsh spotlight. It's not a big difference, but that slight variation in the quality of light just gives a little bit of depth from the left to the right side of the image. Because I wanted so much variety, I've got a medium shot, close-up, and then a few shots that are like extreme close-ups. For the medium and the medium close shot, I've got the Sigma 18-35 on 35 millimeters. The close-up is a Contax Zeiss 50 millimeter 1.4. And then for all the extreme close-ups with all the cool effects and distortion, I'm actually using a Lens Baby 50mm f2 for that. I don't know the exact model of it, but the Lens Baby is essentially a lens with built-in bellows. So the center of the image is nice and sharp and the outside is quite blurred and distorted. And because it's got those bellows, I can physically manipulate it to change the focus or change the focal point within the frame, or even manipulate it to get some crazy distortion and flaring happening. So I'm just physically manipulating the lens throughout the entire performance, which is great because it's such a tactile way to get the exact image that I want in camera. Rather than trying to do something similar in post, it's not going to be exactly the same because I can't be so hands-on with it. Just for coverage, I also have a gimbal shot here on the Ronin S, and it's the Sigma 18-35, and I'm literally just rotating the entire time. It's got this sort of crazy look of the world turning upside down sort of thing, and that really matches the state of mind of the character. And it gives me variety if I want to get something that's not chaotic handheld movement. I've got this more stable rotating movement that I can cut in between. Our second setup here is dead simple. It's the Aperture 120D directly behind him with a ton of haze in the room just to create that nice volume and create that background for his silhouette. This is really heavily inspired by old school horror movies, which I love, kind of like the spotlight image from The Exorcist, but even more so kind of like the movie poster from The Thing. I've always loved that image. I thought it was really striking and just a really powerful image. So I wanted to see what that would look like in motion, and I think it looks pretty cool, especially with the low camera angle, because I'm shooting basically on the floor, so he looks really huge and imposing. Couple slight variations here. This is tinted yellow in post, and then we've also got a version with no tint at all, and the band members just standing with their masks on, just kind of looking tough around him. Our third setup here is when we start to get away from just the plain black backdrop, and we've added some torn plastic that we're shooting through. These are just some drop protectors that you can buy when you're painting a room. It's like $1.50 at the dollar store for, I believe it's 10 feet by 20 feet. So you can get a bunch of these for dirt cheap, and it's just a nice way to add some texture to a scene. Falcon Eyes light mat with the softbox on it on the left-hand side, and then above and to the right is that paper lantern again, providing sort of a mix between that top light and that fill once again. These are all Sigma 35mm, handheld, dead simple. Last but not least, we have the full band performance setup. We started by taking all that torn plastic and putting it over top of that black landscaping fabric, just because we wanted things to still be dark and we wanted to cover up those walls with the black. But by adding the plastic on top, we create some texture and some variation on that background. I also tore off some extra pieces, and just to make things look a little more interesting, hung them from the ceiling so that we get some physical depth, and also some of them are going to catch the light a little bit differently and create some depth with the lighting as well. The lighting setup here is a little bit different than what I usually do, but I think it turned out kind of interesting. So I've got a paper lantern above the vocalist, and that is his only light source. As a result, he has a lot of control over how he looks in the video. If he looks up, we get a lot more light on the face, but his eyes are still nice and dark, which is kind of a cool menacing look. And if he looks down, then he's just a little bit more outlined instead of getting the light on the face, and a lot darker. So we get this kind of interactive element to the lighting. I find that it's usually good if you can do this kind of thing with any talent, because it gives them control over how they want to look, and they become a bit more invested in their performance, and they just give better performances. Worst case scenario, if that's just like another thing for them to keep track of mentally and they don't really care, that's fine, because then they're just going to look up and down as they please instead of on specific points that they want. So it's still going to be interesting, and the lighting's still going to be dynamic, but it's just going to be based on their natural movement rather than something they're consciously thinking about anyway. The two guitarists are lit by the 120D off to the right-hand side. That's just shooting down the middle of the band setup, so it's not casting any light on the vocalist or the drummer, it's just getting the two of them and that wall on the left-hand side. So because there's all that plastic there, it's catching all that light, and it's really popping the guitarist off of that left wall. So even though he's dark, he's wearing dark clothing, we got a black background, it's giving us a little bit of depth and contrast there to help outline him. We've got a 2-foot quasar LED tube below the drummer and off a little bit to one side. This is sort of uplighting him, but it's also casting light onto all that plastic, and so there's a little bit of fill and bounce involved there. And it really pops out all the detail from the drum kit. And as we get lower down, there's less of that plastic there, and it's just more black. So if we've got the vocalist wearing all black and it's very dark, if we don't have any sort of light behind him, it's not going to pop him off that background. So it helps pop the vocalist off the background, the guitarists anytime they're in front of that light, and it helps light up that drum kit more too, while also providing light on the drummer's face. This is a good example of how one light can provide a ton of different functions for multiple people all at once, and that's something that's really important when you're working on a really tight budget. Everyone here has sort of a medium or a medium close-up. That's all, again, the Sigma 18-35 on 35mm. And then I've got two shots on the Ronin pushing in and out. The first is just pushing in and out, and the other is doing the same thing, but with that rotational movement again. The B-roll shots are all just stock footage, because again, I could shoot it myself, but that's going to be more time and more money. So it made more sense to just get some free stock footage lying around, and that made life so much easier. It's just some 60 FPS footage of ink droplets going into essentially an aquarium filled with water. Looked really cool. All I did to it was just tint it the right colors to match their branding, so it'll either be yellow in some parts of the video or black in other parts. The only other B-roll footage we have is for that soft narrative we talked about, and there's the section where the vocalist actually injects himself with the black ink. Nothing changed as far as the lighting. It's the exact same lighting as we had for his performance shots. We just got a quick close-up of the syringe filling up with ink, and we just used black paint for that. And then we've got the shot of him injecting himself, again, same setup. And lastly, we have the shot of him opening his eyes. The close-up shots of the eye are still the 50mm, but I've also got extension tubes on the lens just so I can get a much closer focus and get more of a macro shot. Color grading was super simple. I'm using Omenio primers as my picture profiles because those are my absolute favorite Sony picture profiles, which I'll link to in the description. And then I'm just using one of their conversion LUTs, using the punch one to give it a little more contrast. That's bringing us into the Rec 709 color space. And then finally, I've just got a little bit of a stock Fuji film emulation LUT in Premiere Pro as well. I'm using the Fuji 3513, and I've only set that to 35%. And then I'm dialing back the saturation a little bit and bringing up the blacks a little bit and bringing down the whites. That's all I've done here. Dead simple. That's just enough to give me a little bit of color. It helped the skin tones pop a little bit, and it gave a little bit of blue tint to all the plastic, which helped with some color contrast there and just made it a little more interesting. The last thing I did is I am boosting the yellow a little bit on certain shots, just because the yellow is the color of their logo and their branding. So I'm just making that pop a little bit more. The drummer's also using yellow drumsticks for this, so I really wanted to bring that out. So his shots especially, I'm just cranking the saturation and brightness a little bit up on the yellows only. Last but not least, we're going to talk about the effects. And the effects, in my opinion, are what really made this video. We're going to start with the bigger stuff, and then I'm going to work down towards the smaller details. The most obvious effect we have is about halfway through the video. I've got these pixel distortion effects, and this is what's called pixel sorting. Pretty soon here, I'm going to have a full tutorial on pixel sorting, which I will link here as soon as it is done. But essentially, it's just a plugin that you can use in After Effects, and it gives you a bunch of different ways to distort and manipulate the image based on pixels. You can do things like these straight up and down lines, you can do circular distortions, all sorts of cool things. The guitars do these really cool pitch bend effects that were really unique to the song, so I wanted to bring attention and focus to them. So I thought the best way to do that would be taking something like a pixel sorting effect and doing it in time with those pitch bends. It looked super cool when I was done, but I also wanted to tie it in more and not seem like some just random effect. So because I had sort of this VHS theme running throughout, I decided to also add some VHS glitches on top of that. So it's almost like an old tape stop effect or something like that, or maybe a VHS kind of degrading over time. Putting those two things together worked really well. It fit the theme of the video, and it really helped tie a visual cue to the audio. So it's going to help bring your attention to those pitch bends when they come up in the song. Now, I mentioned previously that we're using the vocalist's seated performance shots as sort of our soft narrative. So to help separate that visually from the rest of the video, I decided to add VHS elements to those sections. It just helps make it clear that that is not part of the rest of the performance shots. It's something different. So I just found some free VHS overlays online, and I'm just using some static effects over top to kind of degrade the image a little bit. The square screen text VHS sections of the video are just basically mixes of everything we've already talked about. So I'm using several stages of those overlays just to really sell the effect. And then I'm also taking that square that I've cropped down and I'm blurring the edges of it like you would see on an old CRT screen. The edges are never crisp, but they're also a little bit blurred and sometimes distorted. And then I've got the B-roll going in some of those sections as well. At the beginning, we've just got the ink B-roll as well as the band's logo. In the middle, we've got the subtitles for the sample that plays in the song. And then we've also got a mix of, there's a little bit of that ink B-roll, and then there's also some shots of the vocalist sort of freaking out and going spastic, cut in between that. And then on either side of the screen during that middle section, you'll see I've got sort of that pixel sorting effect again, but it's more extreme. You can't really make out what the original footage is. And that's going in time with the guitar's detuning. Once again, I'm just trying to bring attention to little textures in the song visually. Pretty soon here, I'm gonna be doing a very involved and detailed tutorial on how to get the VHS VCR effect in editing. So if that's something you're interested in, subscribe and hit that bell to make sure that you don't miss it. For the shot of him opening his eye, all I've done here is I've created a mask around his eyeball, and I'm dropping the exposure all the way down and then feathering out the edges a little bit. To make sure that I really sold this effect, it was really important that A, there's really good masking and motion tracking, and B, I still needed to keep a reflection in his eye. Our eyes are naturally reflective, so if I just dropped the exposure here and made the whole thing black, it's gonna look kind of weird. There's gonna be something not very convincing about it, and that's because I'm not replicating the actual physical properties of an eyeball. The easy way around that was I just took the original clip, I masked out that little reflection in his eye, and then dropped the exposure on everything else around it. So I've added a second layer on top from the original footage that's just that little reflection and nothing else. This was one of those effects where the tracking and the mask needs to be flawless, so I did that all manually by hand in order to make sure that it all translated perfectly. There was nothing that's going to give away that this is a special effect. The last effect I have is super simple. I just went up to graphics, new layer, and created a rectangle graphic. I tinted that yellow and set the blending mode to screen, and then I'd use various shapes and orientations together in sort of one frame increments to create this sort of glitch effect for transitions or just adding a little bit of punch. And that's it for this one. I hope you learned something, and if you liked this video, please let me know by subscribing to see more things like this, giving the video a like and maybe a comment just to let me know if this is the kind of thing that you want to see more of in the future. If there's anything you have questions about, please leave a comment. I'm more than happy to answer it for you. But otherwise, I will see you in the next video.